Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show, The Nation Talks. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thanks to you, the TNT show and Indie Live are growing and delivering more exciting shows. Go to indielive.net for more details. I can give you an insight into one of the shows in particular. Marcus Chown, the eminent science writer, is now part of the Indie Live aegis, as it were, and he will have some shows coming up. You really don't want to miss this. It's a real additional quality addition to the Indie Live family, and this success, and it is a success because remember, all of this is done on a shoestring. All of this success is entirely down to the huge efforts of the Indie Live team, and particularly Kevin Gibney. And he and they need your support. So after the show, and after you've watched the other shows tonight, perhaps, go to the crowdfunder. It's still only 61% fulfilled. So please give what you can, and please do it as soon as you can. I know you've got other demands on your time and your resources and your finances, and I know these are straitened times, but nonetheless, whatever you can afford, I know that the Indie Live team will be grateful for it. Well, it's been another great day for British democracy. Jacob Rees-Mogg is now in charge of Brexit opportunities. Well, this means he has plenty of time to do other things, as Brexit opportunities, I suspect, are as scarce as rocking horse droppings. Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are talking to Neale Hanvey, MP. Neale represents the good folks of Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, and he has also journeyed from the SNP to Alba. So how does he get on with his erstwhile colleagues? There's so much to talk about tonight. I mean, absolutely so much. You don't want to miss any of this. And as always, this is The Nation Talks. So this is your show. Neale is here for a full hour. We've got a full hour of Neale's time, and he's taking your questions live. So there's still time to have your questions considered. Again, details at indielive.net. So now to our guest. The Nation Talks to Neale Hanvey. How are you, Neale?
I'm very good. Thank you very much, John.
And how's life treating you? You're in London right now, I take it.
I'm in London, yeah. So I've got a question for the Attorney General tomorrow morning. And I had a question and a statement earlier today about North Sea Oil and Gas. So I'll be heading back up the road tomorrow afternoon. And then we're in recess for a week.
Oh, is this school holidays or is it?
It's the English school holidays.
The English school holidays, yeah.
Thankfully, as it happens, my boys have got a few days off next week, so I'm quite looking forward to hopefully get to spend some time with them.
That's great, because I guess when you do go back, you still have your round of surgeries, meetings, etc. Yeah. So in other words, what you do at Westminster is only a part of your full job, as it were.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So I think that that's been really amplified because of the pandemic, where we've been up the road quite a bit more often, certainly during the intense days of lockdown. But we're now beginning to get out into the constituencies now that lockdown arrangements are relaxing, and so that plenty of opportunity to get out there and keep yourself occupied over the weekend.
How do you operate a surgery during COVID? Do you do it online, or how do you do it?
Well, I mean, I was, I think, one of the first MPs to start online surgeries way back at the early days, and so we kept them to our standard kind of time slot. So Friday mornings, which is traditionally the time that most MPs do surgeries, because it's when you get back into the constituency. But I've been pretty flexible because a lot of people, if they're working, a Friday morning is not ideal. So I will have an appointment with anyone at any time. If a constituent needs to see me, I work to their schedule rather than expect them to fit in with a fixed surgery
What are the big issues for the folks in Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath? When people come to your surgery, there must be one or two issues that keep cropping up.
Benefits are a real concern. Housing is a frequent concern. Environmental impacts, and they can be a range of things from neighbour disputes to, they generally are neighbour disputes, but it depends who the neighbour is. The neighbour where you've got the issue with maybe another tenant and might be some kind of disturbance or disruption there. It could be a business that's perhaps got a really smelly exhaust or flue coming out of their business that's upsetting the constituent, or it could be a neighbour like Musmoran. So Musmoran, as most people will know, is a big petrochemical plant right next to Cowdenbeath, and has been in and out of the media over a number of years recently because of the flaring that the plant has been carrying out to burn off the gas that they've not been able to process when the ethylene plant's crackers have gone down. So that's probably the most significant neighbour dispute that I've got, and long-running neighbour dispute. But that was something I raised today in the chamber. So good to be able to take local issues straight to ministers.
Yeah, I think that is important. I mean, I chaired 2 public meetings on Musmoran, and people were very. I mean, these public meetings we had at least 300 to 400 people there. Each public meeting, because people are very concerned. They had real issues, and maybe a lack of communication. Not so much with the 2 companies, but just as much with SEPA, I thought. So I was rather pleased with the second meeting that SEPA came along and tried to address these issues, which I think a lot of people wanted them to do right from the get-go.
Yeah, there was, there are a number of concerns that fell out of the work that SEPA did around the time of my election. And in particular, the operators of the ethylene plant, Exxon, had quite a lot of work to do to improve their flaring record, because they really shouldn't flare. It should be an exceptional situation. It shouldn't be for prolonged periods of time, because it's like a safety valve, and so we shouldn't be using the safety valve all the time. So it raises concern, alarm, and obviously the pollutants into the atmosphere. There was a report, just struggling to remember which university it was from. As far as I recollect, it was St Andrews, or not St Andrews, Stirling, but I can't remember the prof that was involved. But the National covered it about 3 weeks ago. So there's a new assessment of that situation and the historical concerns about the impact on the environment and the local population. And so that has, restarted the local conversation, but it impacts not just the operators, not just the regulator, but also Fife, NHS Fife, Fife Council, and how they engage with and operate the supervision of the licence that Exxon and Shell run under. So the Irish Environmental Agency came in to do a peer review effectively for SEPA, and that's been really instructive. But there's a real need for the Scottish Government to back that review up with targeted funding, not just for piecemeal, but ring-fenced proper funding to ensure that we've got the right type of inspection arrangements going on for the plant and for the local community.
We're talking about oil products, but if you look at where the oil comes from, what's your take on the fact that the UK government has just provided 6 more licenses for the North Sea? And people are exercised about this, Neale. They're saying, hey, hold on a second here. The Norwegian government got X billion pounds or £1 million from the oil companies for permission to drill The UK government, by contrast, gave the oil companies a rebate. So not only didn't they pay any tax, they actually got taxpayers' money as an inducement not to pay tax.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, it's really interesting. There's, if you look at both Norway and the UK's approach to North Sea oil going back to the 70s and projecting forward, it's very easy for it to sound like sour grapes that Norway went down the route of having a sovereign wealth fund, and we didn't. But that is the reality, and the reason for that change was down to a chap who was, I think he was an Iranian geology student who came to live in Norway, and his wife is Norwegian. There was a really fascinating documentary about him on Radio 4 the other week. And it was his observation of how the riches could be sucked out of the country, and he designed the system that enabled Norway to benefit, to the extent that they have done, $1 trillion of an oil wealth fund versus diddly squat, and so he was able to predict that all of this would happen. And so he was reflecting on the choices that the UK made. And whilst he made plenty of excuses to excuse it, it was pretty obvious that the UK government at that time made a choice where they wanted short-term gain over long-term benefit. And it's a bit like the psychological tests that they do on children, where they say, there's a sweetie on the table, you can have it, but if you wait for 5 minutes and don't eat it, I'll give you 4. So it's that ability to moderate your behavior and to wait until something of greater benefit comes along. And I don't think Margaret Thatcher could do that. I think she was too keen to get the cash flowing, and so sold the licenses for cheap. But we've seen the same thing happen with the wind turbine development sites only a couple of weeks ago, where the Scottish government sold the rights to develop those sites for what some people, Robin McAlpine, his assessment was that the companies who had the successful bids would recoup the amount of money that they paid for the licenses in 2 days of operation, which is just scandalous, absolutely scandalous. And again, where is the financial benefit to the people of Scotland? That's an ongoing question about the licenses for North Sea oil and gas. But at least with North Sea oil and gas, we know that there is economic benefit to the Northeast. We know that there are around 230,000 jobs either employed directly or in the supply chain that benefit from that activity, and that will help those jobs. But we also know that these renewable sites that are being sold off at the moment, we know that there are no jobs associated with them for Scotland, other than perhaps some technical jobs that will for maintenance and the like. But the cable comes funnily enough, into Kenny McCaskill's constituency in East Lothian, and the cable goes from there directly down to Redcar in England. There are no supply chain jobs. There are no manufacturing jobs. There is no economic benefit to Scotland, and we are seeing none of the rewards from the renewable sector. It's thoroughly depressing.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe somebody will do something about that. When you look, you've been an MP for some time now, really, Neale, and you've had a chance to assess what it's like. What's your assessment or opinion of Westminster? We talked about this earlier. I talked about my experience in the Strangers Bar, where I found it difficult to have a drink because the smell from the toilets was so overpowering. And I suspect that the structure of the building is not of the very best. But what are your day-to-day feelings about working there as a working environment? How would you describe it?
Well, it's a very grand palace, steeped in history, and it's hard not to notice that the grandeur is there. But for me, it's foreign to me, in as much as my political sense of it is that it doesn't serve my constituents well. And I think that of the greater part of its members don't share my interests to serve my constituents well. And I think that's played out on a weekly basis. Ian Blackford and I clearly have our differences. And I don't think that would be a surprise to anyone. But, let's just, step back from that a second and think of today, yet again, the leader of the third largest group in Westminster got to his feet to groans and boos, for no reason. For no reason. Ian might wax lyrical, sometimes I'll maybe joke that it's a bit of a soliloquy, and, but the reality is that that is not really, I don't think it's a reflection on Ian. I think it's a contempt for Scotland. And there's a real sadness there. That is part of the fabric. It's as much part of the history there as the grandeur is, and I feel that regularly. Yeah,
you're right. The way members from Scotland get abused on a regular basis, I think is something that people watching find difficult to accept.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get you into trouble here, Neale, so don't answer this question if you don't want. A lot of people have also said to me, but it's the way it's chaired, John. If the Speaker allows people to abuse folks who are on their feet, that surely can't do anything but subtract from the atmosphere.
Yeah, I think all of the arcane rules and precedents around not calling each other liars work as long as the people who are in the place aspire to the honorific notion of being honourable. And when the Prime Minister treats that honorific title of Right Honourable with complete contempt and behaves in a completely dishonourable way, it just seems absurd that the person who calls him out for that, whether it's Dawn Butler when she named him as a liar, or whether it was Ian Blackford when he made the point, and anybody else who stands up and tells the truth that the Prime Minister is a liar, because it is true. It's demonstrably true. For it to be the case that because of convention, that is that the person who calls that dishonesty out is the one who is chastised, it's absurd. That all of the convention stuff is ridiculous. When you've got people like Amy Callaghan, who has just had the most horrendous experience in her young life, dealing with her stroke and coming back to work, and not being any facility for her, even though we know it can be done technically, for her to vote other than to be dragged into the lobbies. It's just absurd. And the lack of compassion that goes along with that is, it's just a reflection of the culture that exists there, of the obsession with process and the obsession with being part of an establishment, an inflexible establishment that can't bend to the needs of people.
Well, I often think about what you've just said when we get into discussions about Devo Max and federalism and all the rest of that good stuff.
Aye.
And perfectly reasonable people say, this is what I believe ought to happen, some halfway house, whatever. It would mean, at a minimum, that the UK constitution would have to be formalised.
Yeah.
Because you'd have to embed these changes to make them unchangeable, as it were, unmodifiable. If people can't even get the actual building and the way it works changed and modified and rectified and improved, it seems to me there's precious little chance of changing the actual constitution.
Yeah.
Because what you've just described are fairly minor things that would help Amy, for example.
Yep.
We're not talking about, rocket science here. We're talking about, as you say, facilities that exist elsewhere, probably exist in the House, just a question of applying them. And yet they don't do it.
They don't do it because, convention.
You see, this is what I mean.
And it's like, and it's, it's like that sketch on Little Britain. Computer says no. It's like convention. You can't argue with that kind of that lack of rationale or reason. It's absurd. I mean, it really is absurd. But I find I don't enjoy being here. I don't enjoy the trappings of an MP. I wish we were all working furiously hard to get out of here. I'm disappointed that that's not been my experience. I hope that we can turn that around because we desperately need to do it. We desperately need to get out of here. This notion that Devo Max is in any way a solution to any problem in Scotland is as absurd as it is believing that it would be delivered in any meaningful way. It wouldn't be. The promises would be made yet again, and they would be reneged on the very next day yet again. And I can't believe that anyone is seriously considering this. Now, I know that a lot of people have a poke at me because I'll say something like that and then say, but Kenny McCaskill talked about home rule not that long ago. And I think there's a very different proposition to saying we demand home rule now. We want Devo Max right now, no referendum, no discussion. There's nothing preventing you from amending the Scotland Act. Give us these powers, powers over broadcasting, powers over nationality and borders, all of those kind of things that we know are absolutely essential to our economic recovery and to furthering the cause of independence. So there's nothing to stop any of that happening now. And I think that is the bit that's missing in folks' minds about where
there is a problem with that, of course, and it's the obvious one, which is that no parliament under the conventions or protocols, or whatever you want to call them, no parliament can bind its successor. So any of these powers given by this lot could be removed by the next lot.
Oh, absolutely.
At a whim.
Literally at a whim. Totally correct, John. And so, that's why, the position that Kenny was advancing at that time was more a case of, well, look, if we're not going to get a referendum, just start giving us additional powers. Let us start working with that, not as an instead of, but just as well as, let's just keep inching forward. But it's not a solution. It never will be a solution because power devolved is power retained, and it can be pulled back at any time. And so I don't see anything less than full independence as the solution.
Now, one of the things that crops up, as we head towards a situation where the yes vote appears to be getting more and more solid, 52, 51, depending on who you ask, and that's becoming more and more the case.
Yeah.
The opposition obviously are concerned, even if there might be no referendum coming up. Their concern is that if this is allowed to continue, then it will go on all the time, increasing to 53, 54, 55, as each Johnson blunder is followed by another Johnson blunder. So a number of people have raised the old bête noirs about, for example, pensions. Mm-hmm. And, I pointed out that in a tweet that the UK government continues to pay people in Spain and elsewhere in the world their pension. This is, now, I think it's important to be clear that the pensions are paid out of the current account. There's no pension pot.
No.
And that confuses a lot of people. But essentially, the UK government is saying, if there's an independent Scotland, we will not pay the pensions.
Yeah, and I read that Tony Giuliani got himself into a bit of a scrape by dismissing that, and I had visions of him being walked off the plank for disagreeing with the First Minister, but that was just a bit of one of those indulgences in my own mind. But the reality is that no pension is paid from a pot. It is paid from the contributions that go into the system from those who are currently contributing rather than receiving the benefits of. And so the affordability really comes down to how much you've got going in rather than anything else. Now, these are, I think, one of the points that Tony made, which is absolutely correct, which is that these are positions for negotiation following an independence vote. They're not something that, they're something that we need to have a clear position on as a movement beforehand. And I think it's important to do the work and to set that out clearly. But what it illustrates for me, most importantly, is the lack of preparation that the Scottish Government have done in advance of this notional vote next year. And if you think back to, in 2011, the SNP won that historic majority. Alec made it clear that we were going to have an independence referendum. And so from that victory, it was, a few short years until we actually had the vote. And I think it was 2012 when the Edinburgh Agreement was signed, and then we had the campaign proper. So if we haven't got a referendum bill and we haven't got a new version of the Edinburgh Agreement, we haven't even begun the conversation about how that's all practically going to be achieved, because as far as I can see, Nicola's not asking and Boris isn't answering. And whether you believe Dominic Cummings or not, that's another strand that, there's been assurances that there'll be no call for an independence referendum until after 2024. There are all of these different variables within there. Then it's hard to see how, even with a good wind behind us, that we would be ready for a referendum. Certainly not in early 2023, but even at the end of 2023, I think it would be a stretch. And that's precisely the point I'm making, is that we haven't got that. So there are fundamental questions that still need to be asked about currency, about pensions, about, the thorny problems that existed in the last referendum that perhaps we didn't anticipate being as challenging as they were. But, that's why I think what we're trying to do in the Alba Party is start that conversation, because it's not really about the Alba Party. It's about the independence movement, as far as I'm concerned. That's why I'm here. That's why that's why I stood for election. That's why I kept going when things got rocky. And it's why I'll keep going, regardless of what happens in my future. As long as there's a campaign to get involved in, I will campaign for Scotland's independence. But the preparation of the arguments and the finesse of those arguments must be done, and they must be done collectively, because it is not it's not a manifesto for a political party. It's a prospectus for the independence movement that we need to develop. And those are two subtly different but fundamentally different propositions.
Yeah, Stephen Kelly is raising the point about, he said, well, Alba, SNP and Greens sign a pact once the referendum date is announced, so there's no bickering and we get Scotland out of this union.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't asked for any of the bickering, if I'm perfectly honest. I thought I was I thought I was a member of a mature political party that could withstand, did withstand a very vigorous and deeply difficult debate on NATO ahead of the independence referendum. But I remember the passionate speeches in Perth at that conference, and the speech, I think, for me that resonated the most was Kenny McCaskill's, and I don't say that just because he's in Alba with me now, but Kenny really moved me in that debate with his passion. But then again, Christine McKelvey was sitting just along from me, and she was on the opposite side, and so we were all putting our views across passionately, and we all had very strong feelings on the issue. But after the debate was over, we went out into the foyer and the coffee places around there, and we were all pals again, and we could talk about those positions with passion, but still not fall out. But it's now, this movement within the party that targets people like myself or Joanna or anyone who dares to have not a different view, because as it happens, I'm a great supporter of trans rights, always have been. But because I ask questions that perhaps they find difficult but are necessary questions, then the vitriol was directed at me, and it's been a deeply upsetting situation on a personal level. But at the end of the day, I'm for independence, and I was not going to give a winnable seat over to Leslie Laird of all people.
So what does, explain to us, because even though you're intimately involved, a lot of people looking from the outside, I suspect, don't have a clue. And I'm going to ask the question that's probably on their minds. How does it work at Westminster with you and Alba and the SNP? Do you talk to each other, or are you at daggers drawn? I mean, how do you function?
Well, I am a very open, welcoming person. That's just my nature. It's the only way. I mean, as somebody who worked in cancer care for the large part of my career, that has just been the culture in which the NHS has raised me, if you like. So that is, it's always my desire to be constructive, and that's the spirit in which I enter into politics. It's been a difficult period of time. There are people who have been friends of mine for many years, people like Douglas Chapman, who is still a friend of mine. I chat to Douglas when I see him, and there are others within the group. Probably won't name check, but everybody kind of knows that Douglas and I have known each other for a long time. So he's an easy name to mention. But there is, there was a perceptible change. But it was difficult for me. It was difficult in the SNP group from the start. Because of what happened in the election, because of things that came out subsequent to that, where other members of the group and their potential roles in what happened to me, so there was a tension that existed there, and I'm reasonably forthright. So on the issues that the disagreements really centred on, I'm not going to back down because I'm told to, if I feel that something is of sufficient importance to argue the case. So, but that I'm being difficult about it. I think I'm reasonably forthright and continue to be supportive of Joanna and others. Yeah. But there are people in the group who do not speak to me at all. But they didn't speak to me when I was a member of the group. So I'll not name names, but there was one, I think, really interesting afternoon just at the beginning of lockdown or in the early days of lockdown, just after I think I'd got back into the SNP group, and I went into one of the bars to get a drink in the late afternoon, and there was a group of other MPs sat there, and I offered them all a drink, as you do. Bought them all a drink, and I sat down, and they just all kind of shoved in their seats and gave me their back. And I just thought it was extraordinarily rude.
Yeah.
And so I just finished up my drink and then went off thinking, I've got really good friends. I've got a wonderful family. I've got people who love me. I don't need this crap. And, I think that old adage, when people reveal themselves to you, believe them. And so I just shrugged it off. It's not a way that I would ever behave, and I just found it an extraordinarily rude way to behave. So there are people like that. There are people who have been much more offensive than that, and there are other ones who are extremely lovely and caring and considerate. So there's a mix.
Yeah.
It's a bag. But
that's not the reason you're a non-drinker now.
Well, I mean, there's nobody will go to the bar with me, so. No, I mean, I get on really well with Kenny, so that's always good. I'm not quite starstruck all the time now when I speak to him, but I was a wee bit at the beginning because he is a bit of a political hero of mine anyway. He's, of the left of what was the old SNP. So he's kind of in my area of politics.
So you've got two independence parties at Westminster. Now, what happens, say, for example, just help me through this because it's a mystery to me. If there was an election coming up in Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, would there be at least three independence parties, the Greens, Alba, SNP, and maybe one or two others, for people to choose from? Is that what's going to happen?
As things stand, then that would be what would happen, probably, yeah.
Well, surely the outcome would be that Leslie Laird, if she stood, would get elected.
Well, that's possible.
It strikes me as bizarre.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. Anyway.
Well, I mean, and I can see it from both sides. Why that would be frustrating, John. But by the same token, we tried to do what we believe to be in the very best interest of the independence movement at the recent Scottish Parliament elections to maximise the independence vote and to put the Tories and Labour group out of business, if you like, in Scotland. And we were summarily dismissed out of hand by all of them. By the Unionists and by the SNP. And I think what I would say is that, if anyone thinks that this is some kind of stunt, that Alba has been set up as a stunt, then they're absolutely wrong. I can't be a member of the SNP for very personal, but also very practical political reasons any longer, because the party does not reflect my aspirations for independence or for the independence movement. That is very clear to me. It's not being treated with the correct amount of urgency or priority, and other issues have been allowed to cloud the party's focus, in my view. So I'm not, and many other people in Alba are not looking to go back to the SNP, and it would take an extraordinary change in circumstances for that to actually be the case. There are many women who've left the SNP and joined Alba because of the First Minister's refusal to listen to their voices over the conflict of rights around GRA reform. And so none of us are going anywhere. We're all very politically engaged people. We've got a tremendous spirit in the party. And so any notion that we're somehow a pretendy party or a party just for the list has to be dispelled. And therefore we will contest seats. I mean, we don't want to be, and I don't want to be in competition with another independence party. It would be great if we could have an indie coalition and work, for a plebiscite election where there is one independence candidate in every constituency from a broad church of political and civic society. That would be my ideal, if I'm honest. And that would have been my preference in 2015, where it was less about the party politics. But that's just one notion that could be a decision of a constitutional convention. And it's that process that I think we need to start. We need to have a constitutional convention. We need to bring all parts of the independence movement together to come to a decision about how we contest and demonstrate democratically the desire for independence. It is not going to be through a Section 30 order, because whether Nicola is able to obtain a Section 30 order or not, it will come with so many caveats and conditions and, introducing a third question and all these variables that will just distract from the important question.
I think that's a reasonable point, but let me be devil's advocate for a second. The alternatives are equally unappealing, it seems to me. I mean, you have a plebiscite, and the opposition groupings say, we want no part of this. So you win the plebiscite, but effectively, you can't use the plebiscite result, because essentially what happens, and this is the critical thing, the success or otherwise of secessionist or independence movements across history so much rests upon the recognition by others. In other words, you can declare yourself independent, but it's largely meaningless unless other people say, I agree with you. Like Estonia, like the Baltic states, where I know there was a geopolitical argument there, which everybody wanted to stick it to Russia or the Soviet Union. So the parallels aren't quite precise, but nonetheless, so much of their successful independence movements were predicated upon recognition from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Surely that's an issue when it comes to using a process not approved by the UK government. And I say that advisedly, because I suspect the UK government is never going to approve anything, frankly, but that is a reality, isn't it?
Well, it is, and but it's also a reality and a fact that the UK government have to call a general election at some point, yes. And it would be absurd for them to suggest that their parties would not contest a general election, and that is why it must be. There are two fundamental reasons why it must be, and I disagree with Angus Brendan McNeil on this particular point, because I think he argues that the plebiscite should be a Holyrood election. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong for two principal reasons. One, because it's a mixed vote. You've got the alternative member system and the first past the post, and I don't think that lends itself to a plebiscite. But also, and this is the more fundamental one, is that it must be a vote that has a democratic mandate to Westminster, and for two reasons, because the Scottish MPs must be able to speak of that result as part of their manifesto to the Westminster government. We were elected here to sever ties, kind of thing. And secondly, because of the way the Constitution is currently set up, MSPs have no competency to speak to the wider world formally. They don't have that role within their job, and Westminster MPs do. So
I can see a terrible irony here.
Yes.
And let me posit it for a second.
Yeah.
I take your point about MSPs. I mean, the British Constitution is a banjaxed thing at the best of times. But let's assume it exists. And it does seem to me that what you're asking for is a major constitutional rejig. But again, let's park that for a second. Let's say it was. Let's say one or several of the independence parties declared that the next Westminster election would be a plebiscite.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got the problem here, which is unless there's a united front of some kind, however rudimentary, the likelihood is that in vying for a number of seats, the independence movement is so divided that a number of unionist MPs, in the most unlikely way, become elected. And all that does is diminish the very thing that you're seeking to achieve, because you're looking for a plebiscite. I mean, how do you work that?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think what you've got to do, first of all, is you've got to get everybody together in a constitutional convention, come up with a plan, and a decision about how to take this forward. And it should be done collectively, not as a political party. Back to that. So there must be a coming together of minds and a clear proposition to present in a unified way. Whatever that is, I can't be prescriptive about that because that's not my job to say how it should be. I can argue my case within such a discussion, but ultimately it would be for the convention to come to a conclusion. And then it really comes down to how that is enacted. But what I would say is that if we continue to second guess ourselves and be timid and do not act with appropriate and measured confidence, then we'll just skirt around the edges and never get anywhere. We've got to, the proposition has to be credible, both in its democratic mandate, but also in the way that it is delivered. There's no point in, I'm not criticising Ian here, but there's no point in standing up in the House of Commons and proclaiming that things are not going to happen and then just allowing them to happen anyway. There has to be some guts and gumption brought to the table. And I think it's that timidity that frustrates me more than anything. And also, the continued participation in the Westminster system of committees and all of that kind of stuff. It's all conforming to the establishment. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've got Alan Smith on in a couple of weeks' time on the 23rd. So I'm going to put some of these points to him, if I may. There's Mike Russell, the SNP president, was on the show a couple of 3 weeks ago, maybe longer, and he was telling about he's working on a constitution, a draft constitution for Scotland, which will involve a constitutional convention. Have Alba been involved in this? He was looking for a broad consultation, I think he said at that time.
Not as far as I'm aware, no. No, the last exchange I had with Mike was not particularly constructive one on Twitter, and that was a long time ago. Okay, but if I don't want you, I don't want you to speak for Alba on this, but if you were approached, I take it you would participate. Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it seems to me that one of the things that any secessionist or separatist, whatever terminology you care to use, independence group needs to do as a simple hygiene or housekeeping thing is to present a constitution, whether it be interim or draft, that says this is what we stand for and this is what we will not stand for, so that people who are swithering, at least many others as well, know what they're buying if they involve themselves in a plebiscite of any kind. They know what they're voting for. They don't. It's not that Ian Blackford and Neale Hanvey are going to go off and make up some.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, that was funnily enough, just what I was going to say. What it can't be is that Mike goes off and writes a convention that suits him, because that is just not, that's not the way it needs to be drafted. I think you need to, like anything such as that, you need to start off with very broad themes and do that meta work, if you like, and then start to put the detail into a finer level of abstraction the more you get into the detail. But those broad principles, I mean, I think there's the need to define the process. There's the need to define the convention or the constitution. There's a need to define, the new version of the white paper, the prospectus. There's a big chunk of work that needs to be done. And I guess my frustration has been all along, I came down to Westminster expecting us to get our sleeves rolled up and get stuck into them. And it just isn't happening, and by no criticism to Alan Brown. I mean, I tweeted, I think it was yesterday, Alan Brown was making some great points, great statistics about the cost of living crisis and, all true, but it doesn't matter because Westminster doesn't listen to Scottish MPs talk about hardship in our constituencies. They just don't. The only way that we can make that difference is through independence, and that's the conversation that we need to have is with Scotland.
In fairness, just to put it in context, they probably don't care much about what happens north of Birmingham either.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that's absolutely true, and I think we're seeing that with increasing relevance over the last few days, and voices both from the government benches and the opposition talking about northern constituencies that are not getting a decent deal. I saw the most scandalous thing. It was a committee meeting which was attended by Andy Burnham, I think in his capacity of Mayor of Manchester. And he was being quizzed by a Tory MP who said to him, and I'm paraphrasing now, well, this is all very well, you're talking about the government needs to do this, the government needs to do that, but behind the scenes, you're very friendly. I would advise you not to bite the hand that feeds you. Oh my goodness.
Which I thought was a truly scandalous thing to say.
That doesn't surprise me in the least.
So it's not just people in Scotland that are being prejudiced, it's Manchester, it's elsewhere too.
That arrogance is riven through the Westminster establishment. Riven. There are good people there, but there's a way that a cadence, the way that people speak, and a way that they carry themselves that you just pick it up. It's imbued in everything. It's there. And what saddens me is that Scottish MPs have, for whatever reason, we find ourselves in the position we're currently in with a schism over something that,
Of course, all of that could change at the next election if it turns out to be a hung parliament. And then all of a sudden you and other Scottish MPs would be the flavour of the month. You move from being ignored to being front and centre. That's the way it works, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't know because I've never been. I've only ever been in Westminster when it's been, the Tories banging their drum, and we'll need to see, who gets elected from Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath at the next election. But I think one thing that I get, a bit of a berating on social media about is, whether I should call, stand down and call a by-election. I just. I've made it abundantly clear that there was nothing that the SNP did to help secure my victory. Quite the contrary. So I don't feel that I have a responsibility to do that. But The other thing is that, I didn't stand for election to be re-elected. It would give me no excitement or pleasure to force myself to come back down here again, because it is not a pleasant experience. And I am certainly not desperate to be an MP. That is half the problem. We need people who are as uncomfortable coming here as I am to be elected. It needs to be people who are determined to put themselves out of a job.
Let me put in that case. Let me put the question to you that I put to you in Blackford, because it came from one of our audience. Why don't you just walk out?
Well, what would that achieve?
That's what he said.
Well, I mean, seriously, at the moment, it wouldn't achieve anything. I mean, Kenny and I only really vote on things that we really have to. And as long as one of us represents the party, we're kind of relaxed about that. I'm down here more often than not anyway, just because of additional responsibilities and the like. But I would rather be in Scotland campaigning for independence, if I'm perfectly honest. And if there is, the ability to start doing that again, then I will certainly, and I would say to anybody who's listening to the show, if you've got a yes meeting or you've got a SNP meeting or you want me to come along and speak to you about anything, I'm more than happy to do that. If it's to do with securing independence, I am there every day of the week for that. That's the whole purpose of being here. We need people to be elected who have the confidence and the clarity of mind to pursue that ambition for Scotland.
Neil, that's very helpful. It's been entertaining and enlightening, I have to say, in equal measure. We're almost through. We've got about 90 seconds. Is there any last point you'd like to make before we wrap up? Briefly.
I think that we've all got to just continue with determination for the cause. It's not something that should ever slip off our agenda. We've just got to be absolutely determined, and I can just give you my guarantee that is my absolute focus.
Okay, that's great. Super. Thank you very much. Well, I'll just say a few words in wrapping up. Thank you for your questions, everyone. We had a wee bit of difficulty getting all of them through, but I think Neale actually answered most of the questions that you submitted. If not, we can send these on to him if that's not the case. Big thank you to Neale, and a big thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. Hope you've enjoyed this TNT show. As always, we've got a formidable list of guests lined up. The TNT show will be back next week at the same time. And join us then to hear from Wendy Barry of the Scottish Food Show. And as I mentioned in chatting with Neale, we expect to have Alan Smith joining us on the 23rd. And please, as always, a reminder this time to look out for Elliot Bulmer's column in the Sunday National this weekend, and he'll be explaining what constitutions can't do. And you'll find that in the 7 Days supplement. Thanks again. Join us next Wednesday, please. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. We gather that Ian Paisley MP announced in the House of Commons this week that the Tory party is in most respects the English National Party. Took them a while to get there, you might say. Most folks figured that out years ago. Thank you again for joining us. A big thank you to Neale. Stay safe. Take care, please. Oh, have you supported the crowdfunder? If not, please do it soon. Thanks in advance. See you next week. Take care.